Hello and welcome back to OT the podcast. We are here to talk about watches, time, and how to spend it. I am Andy Green, and with me,
It's Felix Schultz.
the one, the only, FK Schultz.
The Felix Schultz. How are you, Andy?
Very good, very good. How are you? On your best behaviour, I hope.
Yeah. Hey, I've got something here. Can you hear what this is?
That sounds like a fat stack of cash, crisp, fresh.
Well, I guess maybe that, my friend, is a copy of Revolution Australia number 14.
Wowee.
Mm-hmm.
You had your hand in putting this together, did you?
Look, I'm the managing editor of said publication, so of course under the auspices of the one and only Wei Koh, the stylish, the expert,
Who's your boss?
the legendary, my boss, Wei Koh.
Your boss. Wei Koh is the rock star of the watch world.
Yeah. And
Like,
the
I've seen
style.
him-
He's legitimately
Style
the style
god,
world.
rock
Like
star.
Rake. Rake's, arguably the heavy hitter of the two magazines out there in the general consciousness.
He's a cool dude. And he legit. I've seen him travel with an entourage. So
Do you know
rock
what
stars do
else?
that.
Do you know what
What
else? We're about to speak to him.
Really?
Not
I
right
wish you'd
now,
given
but
me
like in
some
a few
warning.
minutes.
Oh wow. Okay. All right.
So get on
Cool,
your
cool,
best
cool, cool,
behavior.
cool.
Hey, but before that, head to revolution.watch and buy a copy of the latest Australian issue of Revolution. It's great, Andy. It's great. You'll love it.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm going to steal your copies.
No, you got to
We'll
head to
link
the
up.
shop.
We'll link it up.
It's not bad. It's $12, I believe. I'm not sure
Oh.
about shipping, but it's not exorbitant and it's full of quality journalism. There's some Laurent
Well,
Ferrier.
if you've written it, Felix, it's going to be top tier.
Well, there's a lot of quality journalism from people besides me. Victoria Gamelski, she's a really
wow.
great writer for. You might have read her New York Times pieces, but she's written an
Yes,
excellent
famously.
piece on corporate social responsibility in 2020 in the watch industry. That's really interesting. So get across.
She might be one of my favorite watch writers.
Yeah, she's
Very cool.
pretty legit. What have you been up to, mate?
Been up to things. I just want to flag this.
Mm.
The last few weeks have been massive for us.
Okay.
We've had some huge guests: Charlie Borman, Mark Cho, Tim Mosso last week. We've had Cadell Evans, just a couple of days ago.
Yep.
The feedback from you guys listening right now has been amazing.
Yeah, really nice comments.
Every day logging on and I'm seeing comments and on our social and reviews being left. Just like lovely comments of people that are enjoying what we're doing.
Someone listened to an episode twice in a row. He liked it so much.
Twice in a row. One guy shared his Spotify thing and he's like, apparently I listened to 12 episodes in a row in one day. People are saying they've listened to every single episode, which we also love. But it's really nice. Like, it's nice to know that people like what we're doing. And
yeah, you do
like
sort of think
guests.
you sort of think that we're sort of just chatting to ourselves in the void here, and it's easy to forget that after we hit stop recording, this has a life beyond it. But obviously it does. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you guys. We appreciate it, and keep the comments coming, keep the emails coming, the DMs to the account or to us even. We're not afraid to have a chat with the supporters, and we genuinely appreciate it. You are more so than me. But I've also been liking something.
Yeah, what's up?
And it's a bit of a throwback to, I think, the first ever things that I liked, which was The Weeknd's new album. He has just done a bit of a remix of the banger, which is Blinding Lights. Didn't know it was going to be such a massive song at the time. Let's just say maybe I made it. But he's done it with an artist called Rosalia, and it's really, really cool. She's massive, right? And they sound amazing together, but she also just like spices up the whole song by kind of singing in both Spanish and English, bilingual.
Single bilingual
action going on. We'll link it up. It's a great song to end 2020 on. Can I just say?
Do you want? So I know we're going to have a break in a second. Do you want me to tell you about what's on my wrist now or after the break?
Tell me now.
Okay, I've got a watch on my wrist, Andy.
Fantastic. What time does this mystery watch tell you?
At the moment, it's about 5:06. It's the Chopard Alpine Eagle Chronograph Extra Large.
XL, baby.
XL all the way. It is a big fit in more ways than one. So I think it's like 44 millimeters, But
Hefty boy.
it is hefty, but it works. Look, I think I can pull it off because I've got hefty boy wrists. But the watch doesn't like it. It doesn't feel overpowering in the way that other sort of 44 millimeter watches do, and I think that's
Yeah.
because of it's not a massive dial. There's a lot going on the dial. Like there's that beautiful sort of iris eagle eye texture in blue. There's that big bezel with the screws on it, and it's a pretty sort of integrated structure all up.
Yeah. I got to say, I obviously I saw that watch with you
Mm.
recently. The dial is lovely.
Hmm.
I I wasn't that sold on it before I'd seen it. I thought it was going to be massive. I tried it on. Look, it's like a big watch on me.
We should put up a
But I
shot.
don't.
You got a shot on your wrist?
I think I did.
We'll have to
I'm
do
not sure.
we'll have to do
We'll
shots
link up
on yours
shots,
and mine so we can do a little his and hers comparison piece.
or his and his.
His and his. Yeah, true that.
Yeah. But after trying it on, like I can see that it wears much better in person.
Yeah. Nice bracelet.
And it's a nice bracelet. It's a nice package. It's an interesting offering from a
Are you
Chopard. I
also
got to
across
say.
Lucent Steel? Do you know what that is?
Was that a character from Arrested Development? Hey,
Wow, that was very good. Well done, Andy. No,
thank
Lucent
you.
Steel. It's a special sort of alloy that Chopard are using on this, which
Uh-huh.
Chopard's all for sustainability,
Yeah,
and this is what they're doing with steel. So it's recycled steel, but it's been
on wrist.
treated to be sort of harder as well. So look, obviously this is a loan piece, and I've very much not scratched it, but it's a fairly sort of polished watch with a lot of bracelet. I'd be worried about that. So I think any sort of hardness that they can add to the alloy is a good thing in that case.
Yeah, it's a really interesting watch. I'm keen to see the large now because I've only obviously seen that guy. But
Yeah, cool.
very interesting release. It's an interesting price point. I'm interested to see
About
because this
20k
is sort of
US,
all.
I think. I'm not sure of the Australian off the top of my head, but it's for the chrono, it's 20k.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how sort of when these enter the market because obviously we've had a weird year and I haven't seen too many show parts
Mm.
kicking around. But when they start to hit the boutiques, I mean it could be a really big watch for the brand.
I honestly think it will, and I think it's that
Yeah,
halo effect from the other, the PP and the AP, and it's that ones of like you like the look, but you're not necessarily like not everyone is invested in the name. Like they're like,
yeah,
if I'm walking in with stacks of cash and I want something that fits that bill, this is a really
yeah,
great option. And I mean, there's enough.
yeah.
Like it's not.
And you don't want to spend double on a
Yeah, and, and
something
it's
else.
and it's not like a Me Too sort of option necessarily. Like it's got its own like identity there,
I
and
really like the dial. I really
yeah,
like looking at the obviously the chrono dial is quite cluttered.
yeah.
There's a lot going
I
on, but
mean, it's
I'm
full of function. I
really
think you mean not cluttered.
no, it's cluttered. But that's why I like the sort of the time only
Yeah,
option because you get to really enjoy the texture of the dial a little bit more.
yeah.
So I'm keen to see more Chopard. But let's take a quick break, Felix,
Let's
and
do
then
it. Get
we'll have your performance review.
get Mr. Co on the line.
Today's episode of OT the podcast is brought to you by eBay.
That makes sense. They do sell a wide selection of luxury watches.
For sure, Felix. Did you know that they sell a Rolex every 3 minutes?
Not just Rolex, Andy. You can find some amazing vintage and super rare watches on eBay.
Totally. Apparently, they sold a Richard Mille RM11, which is the flyback chrono, a little while ago for $148,000 US.
That is a lot of watch.
It sure is. So, for our American listeners, they've recently introduced a new service.
Yeah, so if you caught our episode a little while back now with Miles Fisher in it, you'll know all about the new service for the US. It's called Authenticity Guarantee.
So, what's the story, Felix?
So, Authenticity Guarantee is where independent experts authenticate your luxury watch purchase so you can shop with total confidence.
So, say I missed that episode with Miles Fisher. How does it work?
It's quite simple. Browse and shop eBay's listings with the Authenticity Guarantee badge. When you buy an eligible watch, the seller sends it directly to a third party authenticator. When it's there, leading industry experts confirm the watch and collateral matches the listing description. They also perform a multi point physical authentication inspection, attach a security tag to the watch, and then it's shipped with a unique authentication card.
Kabam. Your watch is delivered safely via 2-day shipping with a signature required.
Andy, do you want to know what watches are eligible?
I sure do, Felix.
If it's a wristwatch listed at over $2,000 or expected to sell for over 2K, it's included. Some popular brands and models are automatically included. Smartwatches, parts, and accessories are not, and neither are customized watches.
Do we pay more for this?
No, through Authenticity Guarantee, eBay picks up the tab on the authentication, as well as the 2-day secure shipping from the authenticator's facility to the buyer. Now, Andy, it is important to note that this is a US only service at the moment, but eBay being eBay, they're always looking to expand into global markets.
For sure. Alrighty, so head to ebay.com/authentic watches to learn more about eBay's authenticity guarantee.
With Authenticity Guarantee, there are no fakes, no frauds, and no doubt.
Alrighty, well, let's get back to the show. Felix, it's time.
Pastime.
Be on your best behavior.
Yep. Yeah, it's sort of a bit like not just a normal interview, a bit like a job interview.
Well, I think, like I said, performance review. We're coming up to the end of the year. Christmas is around the corner.
Nice bonuses.
Well, if you play the next hour, right?
Nice.
Okay, let's do it. Let's plug in Way's number.
Andy, today's guest. If anyone's listening to this, they know who they are. I'm ready. I guarantee it. He is the founder and editorial director not only of the Rake, but also of Revolution. Some people call him a sartorial demigod. He's a lover of watches, a lover of Negronis. He's also a man I sometimes call boss.
Yeah.
He's the one and only Wei Koh. Mr. Koh, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. I should preface this by saying that it's very kind for your introduction, but if you ask my mother, she still considers me to be an idiot.
I mean, maybe we could include that. Do you want to redo it? We could call him an idiot as well, or is that?
I think I've just basically put it out there already.
Okay, cool, done, sorted. So, Wei, I don't know where to start this interview. Really, maybe you tell us who you are and where you've come from in the world.
Well, I am at the moment ensconced in Singapore, where I've lived for the last 2 decades. I am Singaporean, though, as you can tell from my accent. I grew up in the United States, and a few years ago, I became a journalist primarily because I couldn't find any other job. Which, to be honest, I think that's how most journalists get started. Right? I don't know how it was for both of you guys, but yeah, I really couldn't find any other sort of gainful occupation except to write about watches. And then I thought I'd try my hand at starting a watch magazine, which was Revolution. That was now 15 years ago. And then a few years later, I thought it'd be interesting to create a magazine about classic elegance, which is the Rake, which is 12 years old. They're both, I guess, part of what people refer to as a sunset industry, as print publications seem to be now heading towards, kind of anachronism. That having been said, I still think there's a lot of charm to them, especially we've all experienced during 2020. Spending a lot of time in our houses, there's something very sort of tactile and pleasing about having a print publication in your hands. But at the same time, we've had to modernize, and so we've gone, quite significantly into not just online content, but also into e-commerce. And as of next year, we're going to go into specialized brick and mortar.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'll tell you all about that in a bit. But that's essentially what I do. I should also mention that I'm an expert of nothing. I know a little bit about watches. A little bit about style, but I'm pretty good at just kind of being lucky and being in the right place at the right time. So there you go.
No, very cool, very cool. I want to ask, because you mentioned, the Revolution 15 years ago now, but why watches? What drew you to watches? Did you always like them as a teen or an adolescent? How did you end up with a watch magazine?
Oh, okay. Okay. So previous to my life as a journalist, I was working in the film industry, and I lived in Los Angeles. And I used to work for a film director named Catherine Bigelow, who is, I think, still the only woman that's ever won the Academy Award for Best Director. But after having lived in Los Angeles, and I have to say it was a great experience working for Catherine, who is now a Rolex ambassador, which I think is really cool. And in fact, I put it out there to see if I can get an interview with her, because she's actually quite reclusive and doesn't do a lot of interviews. And I've asked, but of course I had to go through kind of Rolex PR and said, hey, just tell Catherine, if you don't mind, that it's her old assistant, and see what she says. So it dawned on me after having lived in Los Angeles for about 6 years that I absolutely hate Los Angeles. I think there is a sort of, well, it's kind of a mono industry town. And everyone there is in the film industry. And as much as I revered films and I loved cinema, I realized that I kind of don't like the majority of people who make them. Um, I guess it was a culture, like a very kind of like alpha male, confrontational, like a hysterical culture back then. And I just couldn't vibe with it. It was also a very mercenary culture. So I think people kind of decide what you could do for them before they decided if they would speak to you. And as a New Yorker, having grown up in New York, it's all the things that I was taught to hate. So it didn't work so well in Los Angeles. And so I remember coming back to Singapore just to hang out and see my parents. And I was surprised at how incredibly dynamic Singapore was, and this whole part of the world is. And I would include Australia in that as well. I mean, Australia is also such a dynamic place, but just at the turn of the millennium, there was so much energy in this region. So it was also interesting because even though you can't tell from this podcast or perhaps even my voice, but I'm Asian, but I've never actually grown up or spent any time in Asia up until that point. And so I wanted to experience that, right? And I have to say, it was really to wrap your head around about being part of the majority as opposed to being a minority, which I had been my entire life. It was actually kind of a culture shock for me, in a positive way, of course. But it also, gave me the fact that I have both perspectives. I think is very important. It also made it, important to me that now that you are part of the majority, you should not make people feel, self-conscious about being part of the minority because it sucks, right? So anyway, sorry to go off on that tangent. Let's see. So I came here and worked a little bit in the film industry, but there wasn't too much of a film industry here. And so I ended up calling my friend. I may have told you the story before, Felix, but I ended up calling my friend who was the editor of the newspaper here. And I was actually pretty much down to my last, couple of dollars. And so I had written for him when I was in college. I'd done movie reviews for him. And I asked him if I could write for him. And basically, whatever he was going to say or whatever subjects he needed, I was just going to tell him I was an expert in those subjects. I was basically going to lie to him. So he said, okay, well, it's really fortuitous. You called me because I need writers in sports. And then I said, well, let me stop you right there. I'm an incredible sportsman. I'm the most athletic person that I know. And in about 5 minutes, I'm about to go play some sports, maybe several of them. And he said, okay. And then I said, what's the second subject matter? And he said, the second subject matter relates to an issue that Singapore created for itself. So when Singapore gained its independence, it was afraid of overpopulation, and so it told everyone to not have more than 2 children. And as a result, Singapore has a declining population. So we need stories on sex, so people will have sex and repopulate Singapore. And I said, wow, that's such a coincidence because I love sex. I am very, very passionate about this subject matter. I have sex with myself all the time. And in about 5 years, I'm about to go, pleasure myself, have sex with myself. And so I think that would position me as an expert on the subject. And he said, great. And finally he said, well, anyway, if you're interested, I mean, not to, sort of distract from your expertise in sports and sex, we actually, Singapore is one of the biggest watch markets in the world, and yet we have shockingly little journalism related to watches. So we need stories on watches. And I said, hey, that actually is a subject matter that I love because my whole family has always loved watches, right? And which is true. And then he said, okay, I'm sorry, I don't believe you. I know you too well, so you're going to have to pass a test for your competency related to each of these subject matters. So wrote him a story on sports, and then he called me and said, yeah, that's not your thing, dude. It's clear that you don't know anything about sports and may have never actually played any form of sports correctly in your life. And then he said, I said, well, how was my story on sex? And he said, yeah, it's a bit sad for me that you are the age you are. I think it's around 30, and I'm pretty sure you've never actually had sex. I think you think you've had sex, but most likely you really haven't. And I was like, okay, that's incredibly demoralizing. But hang on a second. Let me ask you this, because my friend was gay, and I said, well, you're gay, and as you know, I'm heterosexual, so maybe it's just a difference in perspective. And he said, no, I shared your story with all of the women in the office. And they feel like really sad for you, and think, but at the same time think you're an idiot, right? So okay, fine. But the silver lining in all of this is that everyone liked your watch story. So you can write watch stories for us. So he said, pitch me a watch story, and I said, okay, well, how about the following? So there was this Italian military watch that was used by sort of the Italian Gamma Commandos. And they have created a luxury brand out of this watch, and it's called Panerai. So the story about how something goes from a military tool to becoming a luxury brand, I think, is very interesting. He said, "I agree. Go write that story." And then so I wrote the story on Panerai, and then started going to watch junkets representing the newspaper, and then started to basically. I don't know if you guys ever did you ever write like watch supplements for other titles?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So like I did quite a lot of that, and I became the guy that would do that. And but it was I think that okay.
Little
So
100 words here and there.
yeah. So I think probably in your careers you've also all worked with like the guy. You're probably assigned like a publisher, right? And that publisher is basically trying to make sure that you spend as little money as possible generating original content while trying to accrue the maximum amount of advertising revenue. Correct?
Yeah, that checks out. The
He
media
says
industry hasn't
to his
changed too
boss,
much.
yeah.
Well, you technically are my publisher, so
So,
I mean, they could spend a little bit more on the Australian content.
well, I always like to think of myself as still of a journalist rather than a publisher, but I suppose I wear both hats a little bit now. I really don't wear the sports and sex hat, so I guess I have to wear. So anyway, so I became kind of frustrated because it was like, can we do original photography? No. It's like, can we do like a kind of a fashion shoot but with watches? No. Could we? And then it was always no. So I was like, well, maybe there's an opportunity here to create like quite a quality publication. And so the whole idea for Revolution essentially was, at the time, watch magazines were considered to be very dusty and studious tomes. I think there was primarily in Germany Chronos. No disrespect to Chronos, I mean it's an amazing magazine, and you had writers like Gisbert Brunner, who's still around and is a friend of mine. But it was like very serious. And as a result, when you went to the bookshop or magazine stand, I'm not sure if those things still exist today, but back in the day, that's where you would go to pick up your print media. It was always relegated to the like bottom shelf all the way in the back in the hobbyist section, which was usually where they would put the magazines for people who collected stamps, and they enjoyed gardening or macrame weaving or cats, right?
nice.
So it'd be like next to Cat Fancy, and then and I was like, well, there's the area of the magazine stand that I find most compelling is the area where all the lifestyle magazines are, right? Your GQ or your Details, which unfortunately now I think is defunct, or your Interview, or all those kind of cool magazines. I mean, I used to love like Days and Confused and ID and all those magazines, right? And I said, it would be really cool if someone were to try to take all the lifestyle dimensions of watches, of contemporary culture and connect them with watches without losing the technical credibility of watches, right? I mean, you still have to, in fact, maybe in some ways you have to know about watches even better if you want to communicate them in a way that's really fun and engaging and still teaches people something, but not without it being heavy and sort of sleep inducing, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then my brother said, "Hey, that's a pretty good idea. You should call that magazine Revolution." So that's how the idea came about, and that's how Revolution was launched. And I remember the very first cover of the magazine. I remember thinking, and this is in the context of 15 years ago. We certainly wouldn't do it today because it's just not cool today in the same way or different. But I wanted to put like a really beautiful woman, right, but wearing like a super technical watch, like a Lange double split, right. So to take kind of the iconography you would associate with a fashion magazine, but then have like a super cerebral watch on there. And I remember and that was the issue that we brought to SIHH and to Basel, and people seemed to really dig it so much so that kind of retailers or brand CEOs from other countries like the United States were like, "Hey, you should bring this magazine to America or to other countries," and so that's how the internationalization started. So there you
Yeah,
go.
that's very cool. That's very cool. What a great story, and it's funny that you mentioned there sort of the Wei Koh of 15, 20 years ago, and how far you've come, mentioning being an unathletic, almost virgin, I guess, loser, if you wanted to call yourself that, to now being arguably one of the coolest guys in watches, definitely one of the most influential out there, and I think certainly an icon in both style and in both the watch world to, you know, the global audience, and especially the Asian market, who really do look up to you. So just quickly, what's it like sort of being that role, being the Wei Koh of 2020?
Well, listen, I mean, it's very kind of you to say. I think that I wouldn't say that I have a great deal of influence in either thing. But I enjoy it. Like, I love watches. I love kind of bespoke culture, and I think that the fact that I get to work in those industries, or reporting on those industries, and I guess with e-commerce also sort of commercializing those industries. And I guess one of the subjects we could mention later is how do you bridge the gap between editorial and commerce, right?
Yeah,
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
100%.
it's a lot of fun. Like, I wake up every day enthusiastic about what I do. Like, we were just discussing today, for example. So we're opening the Revolution Watch Bar in Singapore, which is like a bar, kind of a private club slash bar, but like a fully functional bar, where you can smoke cigars and have Negronis or martinis. And inside, we're going to showcase a cool array of vintage watches, a cool array of pre-owned watches, but we want to also have, put it on permanent display one of the, I wouldn't say best, but like a pretty awesome vintage and limited edition Speedmaster collection. So we want to create the Temple of Speed there, and it's open to the public. So if you've never seen like a vintage Ultraman, for example,
Mm.
and you want to hold one in your hands, you can come here and have a drink and do that, right? Because we kind of feel it's our responsibility to spread that culture. So how does it feel to be me today? I guess I feels good because I get to do what I love for a living. And then I would say probably it's also good because now I'm really old, right? So I'm 51 this year. And I think part of aging, one of the great benefits of aging, which is something that I hope is communicated in my magazine Rake, is that you become comfortable with yourself, and you kind of like don't mind some sort of self mockery related to yourself, or even mockery from others, right? Like, I actually really love Shame on Wrist, and I really love Hodonki on Instagram, and I think they both fulfill a super important function in the watch industry, in watch media, which is to not allow us to take ourselves too seriously, or have our own heads up our asses, right? I also feel as if both would benefit from not only just slagging things that they don't like, but also mentioning what they do like. But anyway,
Yeah.
my point is that I feel happy and respected when I'm being made fun of by these sites, and I think a lot of that has to do with getting older and just being comfortable with yourself.
And I think that's really true. Like, you're right with Hodonki and Shame on Wrist and those guys. But I think that's something you really do quite excellently. And I just sort of want to, we've talked a little bit about 2020 and how that's changed, a lot of the world really, and the industry that we work in, and your business, I'm sure. But something I think that's really, really good is how your Instagram stories are exceptional. um you'll put it all out there. It's not like a perfectly curated life, though sometimes it does look quite good. Is that a deliberate thing, like when you're saying, look, I'm really over this shit, I find this really hard, you guys need to
it was
pull your finger out on whatever it is?
it was really funny because I think the stories that people seem to respond to the best, or the most passionately, initially, were the stories of me having meltdowns in airports. Like, especially with like Ryanair, for example, or any of the Spanish airlines at Vueling, where you're pretty much guaranteed that your bags are going to go missing for you know an inordinate amount of time. I guess people like it because it's human, and they can relate to it, and they've all been in that situation. And it was funny for me also because I remember, like, I used to get really upset. Well, I probably I haven't traveled for a while, but I imagine I still would, and I had no one to talk to about it, right? And no one to kind of like share my frustrations with. And then one day I just kind of picked up my phone and just started talking to, like, the Instagram story about about how irritated or frustrated I was that my bags went missing or my flight was canceled or so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
I felt like kind of like I felt better afterwards. Like I felt like was able to talk to someone and they could lend an empathetic ear, and I guess that's just how that came about. So I would say that I realized soon after that I couldn't really have any other form of social media presence than one that was just pretty much an honest reflection of what I was going through, both good times and bad times, right? And you're right, 2020 has been a crazy year. But it's also been a year that has accelerated a lot of things that I think are important, right? So, and maybe I'll give you guys a little scoop, but we've had a new person join our board of directors. He's going to be our senior advisor,
Cool.
and his name is Jean-Claude Biver, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
heard of
Shut the
him?
front door.
Yeah. So of course I've always, it was the biggest honor in my life that he was willing to do this with us. And I've always wanted to, in some ways, work with him or for him or what have you. And he said something that was really important to me, and it was a message that I've been trying to communicate as much as I can this year. And he said that the people that are the leaders today, whether they're in business or politics or whatever, they all basically grew up in the 20th century, right? You've got a bunch of old dudes running shit in the new millennium, but they're all products of the 20th century. And what was the kind of philosophy of the 20th century? The philosophy of the 20th century was that you must maximize profit no matter what the cost. So, and if you didn't, you were a fool, right? So no matter what the cost or impact to the environment, and no matter what cost or impact to the people working for you or around you, right? And basically, as Mr. Beaver was explaining it in his very kind of vivid and sort of incredibly dynamic way, it's put us in a situation where the planet's fucked, and there's never been a time when people have been more angry at each other and have been more divided, right? And he feels, and I feel as well, that what has to be taught and what has to be perpetuated is that, of course, profit is important, and of course, capitalism is the most important and dynamic, force for growth, right? But how we regard success should be it should be a success that's where you make profit, but it's the correct amount of profit. And what is the correct amount of profit? It's profit while still positively impacting the world, the people around you, and the environment, right? And I think that that's what we should learn, and that's what we should respect and admire, right? And you can kind of see that happening a lot already. Like, for example, and we just recently launched our Bulgari watch, Finissimo Chrono GMT automatic with the kind of white albino dial that glows in the dark. I guess it's called White Light after the Velvet Underground song. But nice. The thing that made me super happy about working with Bulgari was that, Bulgari really showed us the type of brand that they are and the type of organization that they are this year, with so many sort of like give backs to humanity in general, right? So I think the first thing they did when the pandemic broke out was they donated a 3D microscope to Spallanzani University in Rome, so they could study and analyze the virus at its cellular level. And then, they very rapidly closed a scent factory and transformed that into a sanitizer factory and a PPE factory. And, the thing is, today, it's relatively easy to get sanitizer. In fact, there's a huge bottle of it sitting on my desk right now. But when you guys remember, like in March and April, dude, it was crazy. And the worst thing was medical professionals couldn't get sanitizer. And the fact that Bulgari kind of responded to that so quickly was amazing. And then, of course, they created the Virus Eradication Fund, which is to fund scholarships for medical researchers, but it's also funding, for example, the Oxford vaccine. So, it's all of these things are super meaningful. And I think that today, and into the context of 2020, when we decide to buy something, we are making a declaration of the type of world that we want to live in, and the type of brands who are regarding it and impacting it in the right way.
It's a fantastic fantastic reason to be, working with Bulgari. And yeah, we mentioned it. I think that was right around the time we launched the podcast. And I remember sort of flagging with Felix the Bulgari hand sanitizer back then and being impressed. So I actually think you've answered the question we had around the collaboration. Limited to 25 pieces, I believe. Very, very cool rim-filled dial. It's awesome, and I can't imagine there's too many left. What I want to ask you, because you've mentioned JCB, and we can't skate over that. He's a huge deal, and the last few, I'd say, a couple of months for yourself, Rake Revolution, have been massive. You mentioned the Bulgari collaboration, but right before that, there was a huge collaboration with the Ralph Lauren, who also was a former cover model or cover of Revolution. Rake, I should say. I want to know what that was like, because I can't imagine you have a bigger idol yourself than Ralph Lauren. But what was that like, kind of doing a watch together, and maybe how much input did you have?
I have to say that my relationship with Ralph Lauren, and I wouldn't say I really have like a relationship. I would say he's been just very generous to give me time to speak to him, to interview him, and he's been very kind to me, as a mentor, and I would say a friend. Is probably one of the things that I'm most blessed with, and I feel most fortunate about. You're often told not to meet, your idols, because you never know what they're going to be like as human beings. But I would say meeting Ralph Lauren is he's surpassed every sort of expectation I would possibly have of him. And he doesn't talk about it very much, but he's also an incredible humanitarian. He when he realized that cancer survival rates in Harlem in New York were worse than those in the third world, he actually built a hospital there for cancer research, prevention, and treatment. And even, because the community there was at first, distrustful or intimidated by going to these hospitals, they even created a program where like people would, kind of pilot you through the entire process and guide you through it. And so he's such an empathetic and kind person. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that I was most impressed with getting to know him. He was actually on the Rake cover 3 times, and I think he was actually on the Revolution cover at least once, if not twice, as well. So, and quite honestly, if I could put him on, I could put him on every cover. I would.
This is why you started it, right? You started these magazines so you could gate crash the cover shoots with Ralph Lauren.
You can do what you want. It's your magazine, man.
I'll tell you a funny story about Ralph Lauren, which kind of shows you what a cool dude he is. So I remember, I went to interview him in Paris, and and I was told, you have only 20 minutes to interview Mr. Lauren. And so I asked him a question, and his answer took 20 minutes. And I was like, well, I guess it's going to be a one question interview. But then, I noticed that this person kept coming in who was clearly there to kind of extract me and shoo me away, but he kept kind of just calmly relating to them, just with a nod that everything was fine. And we ended up having this amazing 2.5 hour conversation. And then, he invited me to lunch with him and his son David, and Buffy, who is his head of women's wear, Jerry, his brother, who's his head of menswear, and Charles Fagan, who's his head of staff. Basically, he's kind of like his number 2, and I remember being so in awe that it was almost impossible for me to swallow throughout this entire meal, and I was just like, don't choke or anything. And then he actually said, "Wei, what are you doing tomorrow?" And to which my response was, "Mr. Lauren, what would you like me to do?" And he said, "Oh, why don't you come and see me receive the Légion d'honneur from Nicolas Sarkozy?" And I was like, "Yes, that's amazing, right?" So then he left, and then I forgot to ask, of course, what the dress code was. So I asked someone who was part of the Ralph Lauren team in Asia, but their response was like, "I have no idea, because no one got invited to this. I don't know, maybe black tie." So then I was thinking, well, if you're going to be black tie, you should have to be in Ralph Lauren black tie. So it was spring in Paris. I ran back upstairs, and I bought myself a white single-breasted shawl lapel dinner jacket with a black vest, a gilet, and then black trousers. So then I put this whole outfit on the following day, and I had to go to my tailor in Paris, Comte de Luca, to get them to alter it, because it was the only way to get it done fast enough. But they were very understanding and sweet people. And then I'm in the car rolling into the Élysée Palace. and I should have realized something because the driver kept kind of like chuckling to himself, and I look around and everyone is in a business suit. Right? Except for me, right? So I'm like, well, I guess it's better to be overdressed than underdressed. Anyway, there's no time. The thing's going to start soon. So I get out of the car and I start walking up the stairs, only to realize that the stairs are flanked by 2 rows of guys wearing white shawl lapel dinner jackets, black gilets, and black trousers, all holding trays of champagne. Right? So, dude, this is an absolutely true story. And then I'm walking up the stairs, and they're looking at me, and they're kind of like shaking their head as if to say, "No, no, the waiter's entrance is back. And anyway, why are you so late?" But then they realize I'm holding an invitation, which confuses them even more because they're like, "Why would this dude be invited and then intentionally dress as a waiter? It's so confusing, right?" So then I'm like, well, whatever. So I go in there and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to stand in the back here with the waiters, and maybe no one will notice me. So I'm just kind of like milling around by the bar, and I watch the entire ceremony. And it's like I see Anna Wintour, I see Karl Lagerfeld, I see Andre Leon Talley. It's basically there's no press. It's just his family and his friends and Nicolas Sarkozy, and Carla Bruni. So, like I don't know. Yeah, this has just got to be the most surreal moment of my life. And then he's like, they make an announcement. The American ambassador to France gets on stage and says, "Listen, we're going to go down to my residence for dinner now. It's just a few, it's about 500 meters down Rue Faubourg Saint-Honoré, which they've now closed because the ceremony is going on. So why don't we just take a stroll? It's a beautiful day." So I'm like, okay, knowing it's going to take a while for everyone to come out of the Elysee Palace, I think if I find my driver, I can go back to my hotel, change into a business suit, and then be at the dinner without anyone noticing me, which was a good plan, except every time I try to walk out of the room, people ask me for champagne, right? So I keep, and I can't like blow my cover, so I keep running back to the bar, getting champagne. I must have gotten champagne for basically everyone, only to finally emerge from there, head back to the hotel, and then I get to the American ambassador's residence just in time to join the kind of reception line. So, then Mr. Loren comes walking in, and he shakes everyone's hand, and he gets to me and he goes, "Oh, Wei, I'm so happy you could make it. Did you enjoy the ceremony?" And I said, "Oh my God, it was amazing." Then he kind of asks me to lean forward, and he whispers in my ear, he goes, "There was a very handsome waiter that looked just like you there." And then he winked at me, but he never told anyone else that story, right? So he knew, and it's just a demonstration that he sees everything. He's super, super observant, which is probably why he's, to me, the world's greatest designer. But he, it was kind of a joke that we kept to ourselves, right? And he managed to say it in a way that made it disarming and funny. And so that's how cool of a guy he is.
Andy, could we just take a break? I need a refill.
What are you drinking, Felix?
It's your classic filter roast from our new coffee sponsor, Inglewood Coffee Roasters.
Beverage sponsor, Felix, we have made it.
Yeah, I've got a cheeky Yirgacheffe filter on the go at the moment. Ethiopian bean with some light floral notes. It's my daily, and I can't get enough.
Well, Felix, I'm actually punching out another double espresso using their Colombian Spirit of Peace espresso roast blend. It's sweet and biscuity.
So here's the deal. Use OT30, that's OT30, for 30% off your order at checkout. On top of that, Inglewood Coffee Roasters offer free shipping on all Victorian orders and Australia-wide when you spend more than $50.
Head to inglewoodcoffeeroasters.com.au to place an order today. We'll link that up. OT the podcast, fueled by Inglewood Coffee Roasters.
What have you learned? Like, I mean, either from observing from afar or, sort of just following his career, what can someone like Mr. Loren teach you about your business and, how you are as a person, I guess?
I guess, the thing that I admire most about him is that he's actually an innately humble guy, right? Like he's actually quite uncomfortable when you praise him and so on. And it was quite funny because so I don't know if you guys have seen this documentary that was made on him on HBO, directed by Susan Lacey, which is, if you haven't, it's really good. But I remember I happened to be interviewing him that day, and then he introduced us. And then he went out of the room for a second, and I was just sitting there with Susan Lacey, and I was like, "Oh, so how's the documentary going?" And she's like, it's not the easiest. Like, and she, of course, just done Steven Spielberg's documentary. She just done Jane Fonda's documentary. I think she was nominated for, maybe even won a big award for the Jane Fonda one. And she's like, how do you do a documentary on a guy that doesn't want to talk about himself? I was like, yeah, I can see that is going to be a bit of a challenge, right? So then she left, and then he was back in the room, and I said, how's the documentary going? And he didn't say anything, but I could just tell that he wasn't maybe super happy that these people were kind of following him around all the time, because he's a very private person. And then then I said something I can't remember, but I was like, well, I hope they understand that, like, one of the things that's most amazing about you is that you were able to see the beauty in the most humble parts of America, not just the grandest, right? So the idea of a beat up pair of cowboy boots or a flannel shirt or faded denim jeans to you are as beautiful as the most sort of resplendent suit. And he looks at me and goes, you need to be in that documentary. So he goes, please go see Susan Lacey. So that's how I ended up in this HBO documentary as well, which is kind of funny, because if you look at everyone in there, it's all these people who are incredibly accomplished, and you've got this one idiot like myself, but nonetheless, it was a pleasure to be part of that. So I guess humility is an important thing that I learned from him. I think generosity to other human beings. Like, he, in any situation where he can help someone he has. One of the stories that I was told early on was there was a doorman in his building, and his I think son or daughter had got accepted to a very prestigious Ivy League university in the United States. But of course, they couldn't pay for it, and they were not able to secure a scholarship. So it was very frustrating, and they were very desperate. And so without being asked, and actually not even saying anything or drawing attention to himself, he anonymously paid for that child's tuition and I guess it only came out later that they realized it was Ralph Lauren. So the idea of doing things for other people, I think, is really important. The greatest thing that he taught me is the following. And if you try it, it actually works. And he says, a lot of times when people are unhappy, it's because they spend too much time thinking about themselves and not enough time thinking about other people. And anytime I've kind of felt depressed or sad or whatever, and trust me, there's been plenty of opportunities in 2020, I try to think about other people. And like, one of the things that I think uplifted us, our teams at the Rake and Revolution the most this year, was doing our charity auction, where we were able to raise $280,000 for COVID solidarity, right? Which is not really so much a reflection on our work, but more on the generosity of all the different brands who participated, who, like, from the moment I asked, donated incredible things. Like, Chopard actually donated the watch that Ryan Reynolds is wearing in Six Underground. George Kern gave his personal Breitling Navitimer on kind of a unique configuration related to its bracelet. There were so many extraordinary donations that were made for that. But yeah, and throughout the entire time, at a time where everyone was a little bit unsure about what the hell was going on and potentially could have been depressed, both of our teams were always in a good mood, because it was like, okay, who do we get on board for the auction? Hey, that's awesome. And then when the auction started happening, and we were like, listen, if we raise $100,000, we'll be super happy. And then towards the end of it, to see the amount escalating in the way that it did, everyone was just really uplifted by that. And to be fair, also, I should say, the entire example that I learned from or inspired me to create that auction was based on what you guys did in Australia, Felix, with you and Andrew at Time and Tide, when you guys did that wildfire auction.
Shortly after I had moved on, but yes, no, that was a really great initiative from Time and Tide, wasn't it?
It was awesome, dude. And it was also a demonstration that just because we are a media or we are an e-commerce partner or we are whatever we are, doesn't mean that we should also exist in kind of like a bubble of the world. We have to be really aware of what's going on, and if we can do something, we should try to impact it as positively as we can.
I love that. I love that. I think let's pick the auction up in a minute, but I want to ask quickly, aside from Ralph Lauren, who just sounds like a great man on all accounts, who has been your second favorite cover?
Oh, for the Rake.
Either or.
For the Rake. Either or.
Oh, that's a damn good question.
Thank you.
I think the most fun one was probably Lapo Elkin, Also, because it was kind of early on to the creation of the rake, and it was if you think about it, like I guess 12 years ago, from the perspective of like who's that guy, who's that sort of guy, steeped in classic elegance from a cultured background, but who's a rebel and just kind of does things, according to his own rules. It was really Lapo, right? The great takeaway from that, though, was Lapo Elkin is also like an amazingly nice guy. He's such a chill and like cool dude, right? And of course, he's had his ups and downs and some struggles in the last decade or so, as we all have. But I've never taken away from how I've never forgotten how kind he was and how generous with his time and what a sweet person he was. And I saw him, a couple of years or 2018 for a friend's wedding. And I hadn't seen him for a while. We just kind of picked up like you'd seen him yesterday, and he's so effusive and charming and such a good dude. So I would say he was most fun.
That's a great answer. I'm a big fan of I think it was a portrait of Prince Charles on the cover. That was
Yes.
one of my all-time favorite Rake covers. But I've got to ask, Wei, speaking of covers, the most recent Revolution Australia edition has a lovely shot of the Hublot Big Bang Integral on it.
Right.
That's a watch I haven't seen yet
Okay.
because of,
Right.
2020. What is it like? Like what sort of a good fit actually with Lapo Elcan. Is this the future of Hublot in a watch?
Well, I think it's basically that if you look at like the category of watches that's basically doing the best in the world, and that everyone is kind of collecting or purchasing with greatest avarice, it's the integrated bracelet sports watch, right? And I guess there's I wouldn't say they're exactly in the same category because they're a little bit slimmer and more refined. But if you look at the 5711 or the 15202, which is the Nautilus and the Royal Oak, those watches are pretty much the watches that everyone wants. The interesting thing about those watches is, despite the fact that they were both, launched in the 70s, 1972 and 1976 respectively, they seem to be watches that have somehow like really become captured the imagination of the new generation of the millennial generation and Generation Z. So I think that every brand is in some ways interested to create an integrated bracelet watch, and you've seen that also with the creation of watches like the Alpine Eagle from Chopin with the new chronograph that they launched this year, which is a great watch. Related to Hublot, I think that their whole roots are in the combination of rubber and precious metal, or the fusion of elements, as Mr. Beaver came up with. But the idea of putting that watch on an integrated bracelet was an interesting one because it's not a guaranteed recipe that a watch is going to be great simply because you have a cool watch and then you create a bracelet for it. And I have to say they did a really good job on it. Part of what I like is that the case on the Integral is a little bit smaller. It's a little bit more refined, and the bracelet they came up with is a great bracelet. It brings a kind of whole new dimension to that watch. And a kind of a new elegance, a different expression, but I dig it. Have you, Andy? Have you seen it?
No, I'm in Melbourne as well with Felix, so we haven't had the chance.
Right. Yeah, it's a cool watch. I happen to be a big fan of Hublot actually, and
Yeah, same here.
we did a Rake edition of the Hublot Classic Fusion Chronograph a couple years back, and I think it's a great brand.
Can I ask you on that way?
Yeah.
Just sorry to interrupt, but can I ask? Do you think that Hublot is misunderstood or underrated, or what do you
Well,
think doesn't mesh with the hardcore watch community about Hublot?
I would say that Hublot is very intelligent in that it is targeted basically the lifestyle audience, right? And
Yeah,
it's because where are you going to get the greatest growth? It's from an audience that has not yet been converted to watches, right? Or maybe is and I of course there is. I would say that people who believe themselves to be experts in technical watchmaking feel that Hublot is in some ways not serious, right, or not as serious, which actually I would say is not true. If you look at, so for example, the guy who's doing all the R&D and technical stuff at Hublot is Matthias Butte, who was formerly from B&B, and then before B&B was a Patek. right? He is one of the greatest innovators in terms of complications, right? He's also, he's created some extraordinary watches for Hublot, but they are watches at the end of the day that they're not trying to sell based on I guess the perspective of a traditional complicated watch owner, because again, they don't have that history, right? So why try to compete with that? They're trying to do it with a lifestyle audience, a fun crowd, a crowd that loves expression, that loves music, that loves sports cars. It's a bit larger than life, but it's fun, right? And at the same time, if you look at like that watch they launched this year or just a couple of weeks ago, which was basically a reedition of their very original watch, right?
Yeah.
It's so dope, man. Like that watch is really like elegant, and so there is. I have a lot of affection for Hublot. I also have to say, it means a lot to me also about the people that run a company, right? So the fact that that brand was being run by Mr. Beaver and now by Ricardo Guadalupe, who are two of the just all-encompassingly like nice, kind, and generous people, really makes a big difference to me as well. Why does it get a lot of criticism? It's in some ways, if you look at it this like what you get in terms of comments online or on social media, it's actually basically a herd mentality, right? So if it's kind of cool or considered to be a sign of your belonging to the intellectual cognoscenti to, for example, love the 5004, right, which is incidentally one of my favorite watches, but really dislike a Big Bang, then people are just going to ascribe to that because it takes much more courage to just say, actually, you know what, I love this Hublot, right? But to me, the watches are completely different and with different expressions of horology, and it's that variety that I love, right? And I guess the guy who embodies this the most or the best is Michael Tay, right? So Mike Tay, who is the owner of the Hourglass here in Singapore, is to me probably the world's most knowledgeable and intelligent watch collector. I shan't go into the sort of details of his watch collection because I think he would get quite cross at me. But I'll give you one example.
Yeah, do it.
So I get that cross. What can he do?
He's lovely. I don't think he's ever been angry in his life.
Yeah,
lovely.
Well, he's like also quite a humble and private guy also. But of course, it's extremely fashionable to love Philippe Dufour now, right? Because it has been, and quite honestly, I think what people don't realize, at least the people who are commenting on Instagram or on online forums, is that basically it's been engineered for you to like certain things because you think it's learned and intellectual and not other things. You didn't really make that decision. Someone came up with it and you're just following along, right?
Sure.
But anyway, I love Philippe Dufour and Philippe Dufour is universally beloved. And I walked into Mike's desk and I said, hey, is that a duality? And then I looked closer at it and it was the prototype of the duality, right? Which is one of the watches that, I have the greatest reverence for. It was the first watch to use two oscillators with their results averaged through a differential mechanism. Right. So then I look at Mike and I said, well, Mike, apparently Dufour was really inspired by this pocket watch that was created by Albert Piguet. So if you guys like watchmaking history, Albert Piguet was the technical director of Lemania back in I think he got the job in the late 30s, and then in the early 40s, in 1942, he became famous for creating the Lemania 2310, which is, I guess my favorite chronograph movement, and became ultimately the 321 for Omega. But Albert Piguet, when he was at watchmaking school in the Valley de Joux, came up with a pocket watch that used two oscillators and had their errors averaged through a differential. Apparently, that was the inspiration for Philippe Dufour's duality, the prototype of which was sitting on Michael's desk. And Mike says, yes, I know. And then he reaches into his drawer and takes out that actual pocket watch and goes, I own that too.
Whoa.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. That's
like, it was just a moment where you just don't know what to say. Right?
That's a proper flex.
Yeah, dude, I mean, so hard, And but my point is, then I looked at his wrist, and he's wearing a Hublot, right? And so that's my point. You can have the guy that, and I get the fact that he's a Hublot, distributor or here in Singapore, but Mike doesn't wear stuff he doesn't like, right? I mean, that's very clear.
Mm.
And the fact that he has such deep and profound knowledge of horlogerie and the history of watchmaking, at the same time, loves his Hublot, is a demonstration to me of someone that actually is an individual and independent thinker, and has the confidence of who why wouldn't he have the confidence to wear whatever he likes? And I think Hublot is absolutely one of those watches that makes me feel happy when I put it on.
100%. Like, I think, Mr. Tay's taste is outstanding. It's something you've mentioned it a few times, like in that answer and before, is that sort of online herd mentality. And I think that's becoming, maybe it's just me, or maybe it's the nature of the world in which we live in. I think it's becoming more of a problem. Like, it's always existed, but I think the scale and the scope of it with Instagram and Facebook is bigger than ever. And I think it's maybe one of the largest issues in the watch collecting scene, and maybe even the watch industry, where it's just everything's becoming so boiled down to that instant like or dislike, or is it in, is it out? And I think for collectors or buyers, it means, am I going to buy this watch? Is it validated?
Yeah,
No, I'm not going to touch it.
yeah,
Which means that no one's going to take a risk on producing a watch.
totally.
Like,
totally.
How do you fix that, Wei?
It was interesting. There is a phenomenon, or I guess not a phenomenon, but an emotion that is described in Germany as Schadenfreude, right? So Schadenfreude
Right.
is when you take pleasure in other people suffering, right? So the pleasure you derive from someone else suffering, and which is extraordinary, but is it something that the Germans have a term for this, because we don't have it I don't think in English or in most other languages, but the Germans do, and it's good that they do, because it's a very real thing, right? So I remember, like, I was reading this story about how German scientists that were studying the phenomenon of Schadenfreude realized that when you like, for example, when your team wins, right? The part of your brain that is triggered and that derives pleasure from this is the part that's associated with, like, ethics and morality, right?
Yeah.
But then but in contrast, when you experience Schadenfreude, when you derive pleasure from someone's suffering, right? The part of your brain that is stimulated is the same part of your brain that produces dopamine for drug addicts, right? So
Yeah. Okay.
so when people like delight in other people's pleasure, or even perpetuate that, or sorry, when they delight in other people's sort of suffering, or they even perpetuate that suffering, they get like this rush, like you would from like a hit of drugs, right?
Mm.
And it's actually genuinely addictive. And I think that one of the sad instant things that you have going on right now is that there's far too much of that happening on social media, right? It's become kind of commonplace that just people pile on and just savage an individual or a company or a brand or a watch, right? And I think that is, we've kind of in some ways lost our ability to think critically or objectively, and to voice our opinions in a way that is constructive. Like, I don't take umbrage with anyone for disagreeing with me, unless you're a Donald Trump supporter, in which case I'm sorry, I do, right? But I do take umbrage with you if you don't like something, and I don't just mean a watch that I've written about or a limited edition that we've created. I have no issue with you saying that you don't like it, or you think it's facile, or maybe even too derivative of something else. But I do take an issue with it if you just want to just have a rant, right?
Yeah.
Biggest example that we saw of that was the launch of the Code 1159, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
well, actually, I and maybe I'm a contrarian here, but I actually like the new dials, the kind of vibrant colored dials.
I think gorgeous.
And the purple one too is fantastic.
Dude, I love the purple one, right? And I think
It's
that
hot.
with that case, that with those dials, that flume kind of gradient dial, with that complexity of that case and that kind of vibrancy, really complements the complexity of that case, right? and I also feel like the first launch of those watches, again, the case was impressive, the movements were impressive, but the dials were kind of boring, right? But did it deserve the amount of like rage and hatred and anger that was directed towards it? No, right? But I think
To watch.
those things that since everyone was piling on, it just
Yeah.
kind of this like it was like Lord of the Flies, right? It was everyone regressing and descending into their most sort of animalistic and deriving sort of great pleasure from it. But that's not where we should be as a civilization. That's all.
It's really interesting. That's a really interesting point, and it's sort of you do see it get out of hand, and people just kind of expressing opinions, and you almost have to kind of go, well, guys, if you don't like it, you don't have to buy it. You don't have to buy this collab, and why you're mad for whatever reason it is, and that's okay. But like, it doesn't. No one's forcing this down your throat to the point of like you don't have to read this magazine if you don't like it. You don't have to listen to this podcast if you don't like it. And it's sort of interesting. I was talking about Felix just today because I bought a new watch recently, and it was one where I thought I'm really curious to see how this is received on Instagram. Uh, it was sort of a new category for me, and I was really curious to see how people and my friends and people that follow us and our accounts on social media would respond to it, because it was just, for me anyway, very left of field. But it was I bought the OP36 candy pink dial, and the reception has been pretty strong. So that surprised me.
What have people said?
People love it. I had one guy out of probably 300 comments that just said no. But everyone else, and what I found really interesting was actually a lot of people kind of came forward and were like, yeah, like I love the pink, but I just didn't feel sort of brave enough to order it, or I just wasn't sure. So I've asked for the yellow or the green, and it's sort of,
Yes.
maybe there's people out there that sort of are hesitating on purchases out of the fear. And I just said, I'm just going to fully send it, because if I'm getting the turquoise, or the yellow, like that's just as loud as a candy pink watch. I may as well just get the one that speaks to me the most.
Dude, I love that watch, and I love the fact you chose the pink because it's only available in the 36 mm. It's
Exactly.
not in the bigger size, but I love the color pink, right? I think it's an amazing, and I think that it's such an uplifting watch. The idea that also Rolex took these dials, which were clearly kind of inspired by the Stella, so probably one of the most coveted dials, and put it in one of the most accessibly priced watches, I think was a wonderful moment of kind of like of uplifting the entire collecting community in the context of a year where everyone's feeling a little bit uneasy, and I dig that so much. So I think, and I love the fact you got the 36, because that's the same size I would get as well. I think it looks so good in that size.
Yeah, I love it.
It's classic. It reminds me, actually, Andy, you just said that we got I don't know if you know this way, but the logo color for this podcast is a very similar tone of pink.
Nice.
And very shortly after we launched, some rando just sort of hit our DMs, and he just said, "You need to change the color of your logo."
Yeah, I don't know what that's about, man.
Yeah, it's just like it's exactly what you're saying. It's that sort of entitlement and getting a kick out of making someone feel small.
Talking some bullshit.
Wei, so thank you so much for your time. How we wrap a show is we ask for recommendations from our guests. So things that they've been listening to, reading, watching, whatever it is that you kind of think the world needs to know about. Is there anything that you've been using to pass the time lately that you want to recommend to the listeners?
Oh, that's a damn good question, man. I think that one of the things that really helped me kind of this year, where everyone's been in kind of in a more isolated environment, is to try to keep both my mind and I guess my body active, right? So sports, I guess, does a pretty decent job for that. I can't play any organized sports, not because of social distancing, but because I'm super uncoordinated. Biking or running, that seems to help a lot. And the other thing too is to actively engage your mind all the time. And so, it's funny because I a lot of times go back to books like, so I'm on my desk right now, I've got Moonwatch Only, where I'm trying to kind of learn the entire history of Speedmasters, because you learn that stuff, you write about it, but then you kind of forget about it, and in so doing, right, you realize the incredible history of this watch with human culture. I think most conspicuously, of course, Apollo 13, and the idea that the watch basically saved these guys on the spacecraft by allowing them the time to sort of engine burn to position their craft in the right way after they slingshot it around the moon, so that as they re-entered Earth, they wouldn't either burn up on re-entry for being, having too steep of an angle, or bounce off the atmosphere for having too shallow of an angle. And reading about this, and it was just kind of because we're setting up our bar and we're putting together my entire Speedmaster collection to show the public. It just reminded me of how extraordinary watches are, and what a real role they've had in terms of the culture that has shaped the world we live in. And then out of nowhere, Reynold Eichelman and his guys dropped the freaking 50th anniversary silver Snoopy watch. And that thing just blew my mind. It was like the single most uplifting thing. It was like the watch that we all needed to see in 2020, and to see that watch come and to have this animation of Snoopy on the back, like floating through space or flying through space in his command module for exactly 14 seconds, and to remember that award was given because of in the spirit of resilience and courage. And that human beings are capable of incredible things, even in the worst circumstances. I mean, that was just the perfect watch to see this year. So I guess that's it. Read your Moonwatch only book, and learn about Speedmasters.
You can probably get that on. Can you get Moonwatch only on Revolution?
Yes, absolutely.
I reckon you can.
Absolutely.
Well, Wei, let's be honest. We've only covered I think 25% of what we hope to cover, but you've got to go. So
part 2.
We'll have to get you back on.
Dude,
it's been
anytime you want to do part 2, I'm happy to. It's been an absolute pleasure, guys.
Well, that makes it official. We'll book it in now. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Felix. And thank you for doing the podcast. Hey, brothers.
Andy, can I just say, Wei Koh lives up to the legend status. I don't think you don't need to say much more than that. Genuinely super cool guy that has done so much ridiculous stuff. Thank you so much to Wei Koh for being on the podcast. So it's really, really special for us. Also, a helpful reminder to get the latest Australian issue of Revolution number 14. It's got a big old Hublot on the cover at revolution.shop. And we need to thank some other people, Andy. Who do we need to thank?
Thank you, eBay, as always. Support us by supporting our sponsors. So check out the links to eBay that we put in the notes. Thank you to Inglewood Coffee Roasters as well. OT30, that's the code we mentioned throughout the show.
30% off.
30% off. Yeah, that's great. Thank you guys for emailing us. As we mentioned, we love it. We love the feedback. That's OT the
Gmail. We own Gmail now.
We own Gmail. We've been bought by Google. Google Ventures, maybe. OTthepodcast@gmail.com, or slide in slippery to our Instagram DMs. Nice. OT.podcast. Thank you to Major Tom Media for producing the show. And if you like the podcast, subscribe. Tell your friends.
Review it.
Tell your neighbours.
5 stars.
Tell your sister's brother.
Is that Kevin?
It's your uncle. Uncle Kev.
Uncle Kev.
Wei Koh's going to be a hard guest to top, but I think we'll do it next week.
Let's do it.
All right, catch you guys.